Everyone arrives at that worst day of their life with an entire life of experience behind them. It's really hard to predict how anyone's going to react to something like that. And it's just about meeting each person where they're at, how they're processing what's happening.
Reality TV by name, but how close is it to reality? Someone who knows all about it and consumes it for a living, all part of the job, is this week's guest, Jana Firestone.
So I would never behave like that. I would never speak to someone like that. I would never go on TV and behave like that.
She's also the host of the Curious Life podcast, where she regularly interviews TV, media and sporting personalities, getting them to share their stories and how they've turned their own tragedies into triumphs.
The idea of going to a therapist, the feeling that you have to prepare something, that's incredibly anxiety inducing in itself. You just go in there and respond to the questions and see what comes up in that moment.
Jana, welcome to Share.
Thank you so much, Steve.
I'm definitely excited to jump into a few topics today and love to get your insights on some things that are happening out there in the world and also get some reflections that you've kind of, encountered through your life.
Amazing. Thrilled to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start. Tell me your story. What's your story? What really kind of stands out when I ask you, what is your story?
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because there are just so many different parts to us. So it's like, which hat am I going to put on today?
Which chapter?
Yeah, which chapter? That's right, exactly. Look, I guess I'm someone that I do a whole lot of different things. I've been a therapist for the last 18 years now, and I've worked in places like the Coroners Court and in child protection with victims of crime, in a school setting, in private practice, and I've kind of seen it all. But, I grew up with a psychiatrist for a father and a psychologist for a mother. So it's kind of like the family business in a way.
Yep.
But then, my mum died suddenly when I was 21.
Yeah.
And that kind of threw my life into sharp perspective. I was heading in a bit of a different direction. I'd studied musical theatre, and I was a singer. And at 21, really my main focus was having a good time. I just wanted to be with my boyfriend and my friends. And that was the number one priority. And then you go through something like the sudden and unexpected death of a parent. And as you can imagine, you grow up pretty quickly. So I feel like that was kind of the beginning of an awareness for me that life doesn't always go the way that it's planned. You might not even be aware of all of the things that can go on in life. And it was like the curtain had been lifted. But I was at the same time living this kind of dual existence where I was still the party girl and the fun 21, 22, 23-year-old girl, where the focus was working in a bar and having fun with my friends and not really taking life all too seriously. But in private, living this really serious life where I was completely struggling with grief and trying to come to terms with this completely new existence and reality that was completely out of my control. And so I think I learned to mask all of that pretty well. I could probably have a conversation like this quite rationally about how I was feeling and what I was going through. But then I would also be on the floor howling, hysterically crying in private and feeling the injustice of all of that. But it's because of that I think I have ended up where I am today, which is in the career that I am, having written a couple of books, been doing the podcast now for the last 5 or 6 years and, working really closely with other people's grief. And I think, those things happened to kind of set me on a path that maybe I was meant to walk down.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, having a psychiatrist and psychologist as parents, how do you think that helped shape you in those kind of, younger and teen years?
It sort of gave my brother and I the language to talk about feelings and to kind of unpack human behavior from a really young age. It was just kind of par for the course for us to sit at the dinner table. And I remember my brother being, frustrated by some of his mates and not really understanding how or why they'd behaved a certain way. And all of us kind of talking about it, like, well, I wonder if, maybe there's something going on in the background, or I wonder, like having those kind of more adult conversations around understanding behavior and thinking and feeling that was really pretty outside the norm. I think especially for young boys. I mean, I'm talking about he might have been 13 or 14 at the time. What 13-year-old's really thinking about why somebody might be behaving a certain way. You're just more worried about the thing that they did and how it made you feel. So I think that was kind of a blessing and maybe a curse in a way, because we sort of did unpack things in a deeper way at times. That's not to say we were these, evolved species by any means. I was absolutely still a ratbag teenager and only cared about myself like most of them. But yeah, I sort of grew up with an understanding that there was a whole myriad of reasons why people might behave the way that they do, and perhaps having a little bit more empathy for people in that way.
Yeah, well, one of the big things for people is it's usually later on in life, as you've kind of gone through your 20s and in your 30s, and then you kind of reach a point where you get a little bit more awareness. But it sounds like that you were kind of taught, or I suppose discovered a little bit more self-awareness or awareness of others a lot younger than most would.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm conscious of conversations about other people. Like there were, if there was something happening, there was a kid at school who was unwell, and having kind of conversations with my family about, how their family might be doing. And, I just think it sort of went a little bit deeper than just kind of acknowledging or noticing things that were happening in our lives. So yeah, I think it started me on this path a little bit earlier, but I just do want to clarify, I absolutely did not have that self-awareness that I have now. All my friends can attest that as a teenager, I was absolutely like them and focused on all of the things that teenagers are. But yeah, I think it gave us the language. And I think I also had this kind of idea early on that I had in my head that, I'll go into psychology when I'm like 30. That's what I'll do like later in life. But for now, I just want to have a good time. And, that's kind of what I did. I went to uni and really didn't enjoy the first year. I was doing music performance at a big university here in Melbourne. And it was a little bit it was very classical, and it just wasn't like the pumping creative scene that I was looking for. And so I deferred that and then went and auditioned for a musical theatre course and got into that. And that was, of course, everything that I could have wanted. That was just a great time. And then I think it was the year after that my mum died. So I was still very much in this kind of playful and creative space where I was, not sure where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do, but far off in the distance, I had that psychology kind of safety net in the back of my mind. And I had this kind of potentially a youthful arrogance that I had the family, training to a degree. And I already knew about what this work was and all of that. I just needed to get my piece of paper. And so it was almost like I felt like I'd had a jump start in the family business, but little did I know, obviously, literally nothing. But it just kind of was always there in the background.
And did your brother follow on in the footsteps of your parents as well?
No, he didn't. He's had an interesting journey. He's got a couple of different degrees. He's got an industrial design degree and an education degree, and he's not using either of them. But still, it's almost like occupational hazard that we end up, dissecting things and unpacking things and, kind of being armchair psychologists on everything. So I don't think that will ever leave either of us.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. So obviously, as dad as a psychiatrist, mum as a psychologist, and what you went through led you to kind of, being a therapist, and you know, took on a lot of roles. What were some of the roles, over your time that you've kind of, have really shaped your career, do you think, or have given you the biggest perspective?
I think all of my early work really has stayed with me. So straight out of uni, I was working in child protection, and there seems to be a pattern of really green, graduates going into that kind of work, which is really intense, really heavy work, and you're very ill equipped for it. Um, and it's really long hours and, very difficult work. I was working in the response team, which was, when there was a first notification, it was like the front line. So we would have to go and do the initial investigation and, make a call about what direction the case would go in. And then we weren't supposed to hold on to any cases. You're meant to kind of work with them in the interim and pass them on to case management. But because everyone was so understaffed in every department, we ended up holding on to cases. And I think I was there maybe 18 months before I completely burnt out. And I still had families that I was working with that I'd collected in my first week of being in that job, as well as continuing to respond to new cases as they were coming up. So it was really long hours. Sometimes, you're holding after hours court hearings at 8 o'clock in the office because a direction needs to be made about a child urgently. Or you're working in the office, you're there till 8 o'clock and then you've got to be in court first thing in the morning. And excuse me. And it was intense. But so many of those families have stayed with me. I think about them all the time, and I wish I knew what they were doing and how those kids are and how those young parents are. So many of them were just young girls like me that really needed support and didn't have family or connections and weren't linked in with services. And I really kind of related to them and could put myself in their shoes thinking, gosh, if I was 21 and had a baby and, didn't know where to turn, what would I do? So, of course, there were some incredibly tragic stories. There were some very difficult cases. But I do think about them. And then, the next big job for me was a coroner's court. So I was seconded from working with victims of crime over to the coroner's court at the time of the Black Saturday bushfires. So that for anyone, listening that might not be aware, that was a huge bushfire that occurred in Victoria in early 2009, and 173 people lost their lives, and thousands of homes and animals, of course, were lost. And it was an incredibly, incredibly hard time for this state. And so I was seconded to the coroner's court then and ended up continuing to work there for about 5 years. And that work, as you can imagine, it's purely sudden and unexpected death. There's nothing else. So it's every single age in the lifespan from, newborns all the way to, 100, over 100. And it's anything from, car accidents to, just a medical death or homicides, suicides, I could go on, but it's at times incredibly traumatic. And I was working with families, friends, and witnesses who were affected by those deaths. So nobody had any warning. Nobody had a lead up to kind of prepare for what was coming. And again, I had a similar experience because my mum had died suddenly And so I felt like I could relate to my clients on a personal level. And I feel like that gave our relationship more depth. And I did feel like I was able to connect better because I understood to some degree what they had been through. And that work has very much stayed with me.
That would have been a really tough role because the people that you were working with, the witnesses, the families, they would have all had their own agendas, right? Like around what they thought that you needed to find or what you needed to come up with, or the kind of research and I suppose how you would come to a conclusion of what had happened, or what what the evidence kind of pointed to. So it would have been hard because you're managing all these different emotions and all these different agendas.
Yeah, so the way that it works is that my role was there as a counselor, but I was doing everything from supporting people through the early stages where they've just found out, and to assisting people all the way through the inquest, which in some cases could be many years down the line. It's almost never a quick process for families. So it's preparing them for the length of time that it can take to, as you say, come to a conclusion. And in
Get some
some cases
closure.
it's yeah, and in some cases it's a bit more straightforward and they can sort of establish a cause of death more quickly. But in other cases it's not straightforward at all, and it can go on for years and years and years until the coroner can make a call about the circumstances surrounding their death. And that's incredibly distressing for families. Like,
Hmm.
you wouldn't wish it on anyone to have to go through that.
No. How did you manage? Because obviously people would have gone in kind of wanting a certain, they had a focus, like they would have known what they wanted from a closure, like what they needed,
Mm,
but obviously they don't always get what they need. So
yeah.
how did you manage as a therapist and a counselor? How did you manage those emotions, and kind of when someone was like, well, this is what happened and this is what closure I need, and it was something different?
Yeah, that's really hard. And, you just have to walk that walk with them. And sometimes it was a matter of taking things to the coroner and saying, look, this is what the family's saying. They're really unhappy about this, and supporting them through, even a formal complaint. Um, but, I would have already established a relationship with most of them
Mm.
prior to maybe that revealing itself. So in the
Okay.
beginning, it can be a little bit like you're just in shock and just kind of managing what has happened. Or someone might have come to me years down the line because, as you say, they're really unhappy with the outcome. So I would just have to be there for them and just listen to them and take on what they were saying and just try to find a way to support them through it. And so sometimes that was just literally holding the space and being there in a therapeutic sense. And other times it would be actually taking action and advocating for them in the system, which, can be really, really difficult for people.
Yeah. And obviously you've got a couple of different types of people, right? You've got some people that will let tragedy, events, and kind of things that happen in their life define them. But then you've also got ones that will actually go through that awareness, that reflection, and actually come out and grow through it even stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone arrives at that worst day of their life with an entire life of experience behind them that
Mm.
informs how they're going to react and how they're going to cope with what's happened. So it's really hard to predict how anyone's going to react to something like that. Losing a child is very different to losing a grandparent. Each can
Mm.
be traumatic and of course distressing in their own way, but there are different layers involved. Um, so again, it's just about meeting each person where they're at and finding out a little bit about where they've come from, what's their story, so that you can understand how they're processing what's happening in that moment.
Yeah. From for me, going through mental health and seeing a psychologist and seeing a psychiatrist, for me, I look at it and go, okay, sessions with a psychiatrist or psychologist are really important. But what I've learned is it's the work that you do between the sessions that is like the most important work.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? I think people get frightened by the idea of the work, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming, and it can feel like, what do you mean the work? Like, what do I have to do? Do I have to like sit down and like think about everything that's wrong with me and, speak it out loud all the time? But it can be as simple as, like, for me, I'm someone that, struggles with anxiety. I get terrible anxiety.
Mm.
And for me, the work that I'm doing at the moment is about embodiment and really just working to stay in my body and not panic when I feel that anxiety, which is a physical response. It's a nervous system response that I feel in my body and then I react to. So my
And a
work,
completely normal response.
yeah, totally. It's an alarm system. And, okay, my alarm might be slightly affected by all the kind of work that I did in all of those years. But, we're learning and we're evolving. But yeah, for me, it's about finding time to lie on the Shakti mat and to listen to a meditation, or to actually not try to fill my day with 10,000 different things, because that's where my brain wants to go. And actually physically calming my nervous system down by teaching it new ways to behave. And it's stuff like that, and it's going to be different for every single one of us. But I think it's really important not to be scared of that work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think interesting, I listened to a podcast many years ago, and it was interesting because I think it was a marriage counselor who was a psychologist. And, she said, if you really want to, kind of fast track the work and kind of get on the journey and kind of progress down that path of kind of self-reflection and the growth, the first session you go into with a psychologist or a counselor, what you need to say to them is, I know I'm the problem. Where do we, how do we work with that? Right.
Love
because
it.
a lot of the time it takes 6 months. She was like, it usually takes about 6 months for someone to kind of have the reflection through questions that I've asked them, that they kind of sit there and they go, do you think I could be part of my problem? Well,
That's brilliant.
Do you think
Yeah.
I could be the problem in my relationship?
Yeah.
Or, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was awesome. And for what I was going through, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, like you've got to look in the mirror. And I shared recently, and I'm sure you've seen it, where that bear kind of sees the mirror in the woods.
Yeah.
And that's how scary it is, right?
Yeah.
Self-reflection, kind of going, okay, I'm me. Why am I me? What makes me me? Why do I react the way I do? I was talking to someone the other day, and through my kind of journey, journaling has been like the most powerful thing. And someone said to me the other day, but like, how do you journal? Like, I just don't know how. And I said, well, just start with, when did you get angry or frustrated, or when did you have an emotional response recently? And just start asking yourself, what did I feel in that moment? What was I thinking? What did my mind go to? When was the first time in my life I felt like that? All these different questions, and just start writing. And I said, things will come up that you will go, oh, I didn't know that was affecting me, because you've packed it so much in your luggage in the back of your head, and you've like suppressed it down going, I don't want that ever to come back up. But at the end of the day, through life, everything always comes back up.
So true. We can't escape
Exactly.
it.
Especially when we don't want it to, right? It'll
Yeah.
be a point where we go, okay, we're going to pack that right down, and then something will come up, and someone will ask us a question, and you'd find this with your podcast as well. You'll ask a question sometimes, and someone will start crying, and you'll go, oh, what was that? And they may not have cried on that topic ever, but something triggered them. We were talking earlier, you'd listened to Gary, a recent episode, and I've had a couple of other guests as well. And sometimes they say to me afterwards, oh, a couple of things there that you asked me, and it kind of made me feel something. I've kind of got to unpack that. I've kind of got to
Yeah.
really look into that and kind of go, right, what does that mean? What do I need to get out of that, and where do I need to grow so that that doesn't affect me anymore?
Absolutely. And how often do we get the opportunity to sit down with someone and to be asked questions about ourselves where we have to consider the answer? And as you're answering, I mean, as I'm talking to you, I don't have any pre-planned answers here. It's just
No.
coming, right?
Yep.
And, you know, it's an opportunity for all of us to actually reflect on what's happening in our lives. And I do find, like you said about the marriage counselor anecdote, it's listening to other people's stories that also gives you that luxury of however long that window is. It's half an hour, it's 45 minutes, however long that episode is, to without even realizing, be reflecting on our own lives in relation to that story. So, you might not have lost a parent, but you might have lost someone very dear to you who you love, and maybe my sharing about my story helps you as a listener to consider what happened in your life and how did you react and what were you thinking at the time. And that's just like my story, or God, that's no way near how I would have reacted, and that's the work, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and that's the key thing around, why I do the podcast, and we were talking off air as well around why you do the podcast, is you kind of sharing stories and sharing information, reflections, conversations that people relate to, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about reality TV soon, and what people draw from that. But it is about people just going, oh, I felt like that, or whatever it is, right? And
Mhm.
it's really showing people. And I did a bit of a kind of a reel not long ago where I was like, okay, I'm a podcast host, I produce a podcast, but at the end of the day, like, I want people to be their own podcast host in their own life. I want
Mm.
them to go ask themselves the questions, right? Ask themselves the questions and kind of go, if if a podcast host was to ask me questions, what would they ask me? What would I ask myself? And then start answering them, right? And you
Yeah.
will learn so much more about yourself. You'll be
Yeah.
able to grow, and you'll be able to go, oh, I never knew that about myself. I had someone reach out this week and they said, oh, can you come on my podcast? And I said, yeah, no problem. And we had a bit of a pre-meeting, and he said, this is the kind of structure. And I said, that's great. But I said, I'd rather just run through. And he's like, what do you think you'd answer to this? And I'm like, you'll work it out. You'll hear, because I said, I will be
Yeah.
drawn, and whatever's I'm connected to in that conversation, you will get my authentic response, because how I'm feeling today is different to how I might be feeling that day.
Yeah.
Or through your questioning, the result, I suppose, or the reaction might be completely different. So I said,
Yeah.
let's just run with the chat. Obviously, good to give you some information about me, but I look forward to when I have that chat with him, that I just answer what I'm feeling at that time. Not
Yep.
trying to come up with the answer before I get asked the question.
You know what? I think this is a great analogy for therapy as well. And I know a lot of people are really nervous about the idea of going to a therapist because
Yep.
of exactly what you just touched on, the feeling that you have to prepare something and you have to know what you're going to talk about. Like, I've booked in to see someone because I'm anxious, but then what am I going to talk about? I don't know. How far back do I have to go? What do I need to bring up? And that's incredibly anxiety inducing in itself. And I just love the way you described that. And I hope that people listening can kind of take this away with them, that if you are thinking about going to talk to a therapist or any kind of practitioner, that it's exactly what you're saying, Steve. You just go in there and respond to the questions in an authentic way and see what comes up in that moment, and not to have to worry about how much you need to share, or the inverted commas you should be sharing. It's about what's coming up for you in that moment. And a skilled therapist will be able to guide you to the
I know.
places that maybe they think would be helpful to kind of dive into a bit more. But yeah, I think that's a really useful kind of little nugget there.
And I think one of the things as well, like I really say to people, if you're not feeling great from a mental health perspective, or you're struggling things emotionally, physically, just start journaling, because before you reach out and go to a doctor or you go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, if you start journaling your thoughts, your feelings and everything like that, you can provide that to them, and you can actually, one, you'll probably kind of know what you need to talk about and where you need to start, but also it gives them an idea of how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what feelings, emotions, physically, mentally, emotionally. And it just means you're going to be able to move that needle, and you're going to be able to move down that path so much better,
Yeah.
because you've already done some of that pre-work, rather than, the people, and I'm sure you've experienced that people come in, sit in a chair and you go, so what would you like, what would you like to talk about today? And they just go, I don't know why I'm here. And you're like,
Yeah.
all right, we're going to do it the hard way, are we?
Yeah. Yeah. Or the one word answers, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, it's got 59 minutes to go. Okay.
Yep. Before we get back into the episode, from time to time you might have a burning question, a guest recommendation, a comment or some feedback, which I always appreciate. If so, I'd love to continue the conversation after this episode, so let's connect. I'm easy to find, but the best place to engage and connect is on Instagram, @TheSteveHodgson. But that's enough from me. Let's get back into the episode. So let's talk about, obviously you love some reality TV, and how the correlation between, obviously, therapy and reality TV and society. Obviously for some, everyone will say, oh, look, I just love reality TV because I can just escape and I can just sit on the couch and I can just zone out. But I'd also love to get your thoughts on, is reality TV and does reality TV impact some of the dysfunction that is happening, I think, in society?
Great question. Great question. I think the short answer is probably yes. So I started watching reality TV for all of those reasons you just mentioned. I was working in heavy fields. I was working in, as I said, the Coroners Court, and before that in child protection. And in those years before that, like growing up in the 90s and I was a young adult in the early thousands, there was, it was Law and Order. There was lots of crime shows. There weren't really, we had 4 TV channels. There was no streaming. So the choice wasn't really there. It was just kind of a lot of heavy stuff on TV. And at the time I was working in those jobs, I think I'd just gotten Foxtel, and the whole world of like MTV and VH1 opened up for me. And suddenly I could escape into these ridiculous American paradigms where people were doing outrageous things that were so different to my reality and so far away from the work that I was doing that that's all I could kind of handle. And it was amazing. It was the gateway drug for me. And then it was all the Real Housewives and all of the shows on Bravo TV, which are now all on Hey You here in Australia. And so I have just been an OG reality fan, for as long as it's existed now. But I think there's kind of, to answer your question, I think there's a lot that's shifted. And probably partly to do with reality TV, probably partly to do with social media. Everybody now has access to their own, video camera. Everyone can create their own reality show on YouTube, on social media, on TikTok. Everybody is a star who has a camera. And I think that has changed the perception of, our access to stars is completely different now. We have these parasocial relationships with people who are on TV, in music, in film, that we never would have had access to before. In the 90s, Jennifer Aniston was this, high profile superstar that we would never have dreamed of getting close to. Now we can watch her playing with her dog in her lounge room, on Instagram. So there's a lot that's shifted in the kind of, I guess, the culture of entertainment. So I think all of that has probably contributed to a lot of the dysfunction. And as much as I enjoy social media and love a doom scroll as much as anybody, I can absolutely feel how bad it is for me. And I'm really not impressed by a lot of the stuff that I see. I don't love what it's doing for women and for body image and this completely fake created kind of version of people with AI and all of the kind of face tuning and editing and, I do worry. I've got 3 young kids and I think, like, what's your future gonna look like if this is kind of where we're at now? So, of course, I think there's a lot that's wrong with it, but
Yep.
I also am completely addicted to it.
Yeah. I saw the other day, it was funny, on this topic was around, me as a kid, mum and dad were like, don't sit so closely to the TV. And then they've got 2024 Apple Vision Pros
Yeah,
stuck to your face, and
so
it's interesting
true.
how just that change has happened.
Yep.
I find with reality TV, some of it is just so you just sit there and you go, this is just so not reality. But
Yeah.
and obviously there's a lot of scripting around. Like they call it reality TV,
Yeah.
but a lot of it is scripted and a lot of it is shown in different lights because obviously we see like even with things like The Block, right?
Yeah.
Some of this stuff you go, like even the recent series of The Block, and it's like, oh, are these people going to come back for the finale? Of course they're going
Yeah.
to be there for the finale. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it
Manufactured drama.
it is,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because obviously, it must be really interesting because obviously a lot of these reality TV shows with the casting of these people must work with psychologists and stuff like that to go, how do you think this person's gonna react? And how,
Yeah.
there must be this kind of team behind the scenes that are like, how can we pick someone? Oh, she's got some big triggers.
Yeah.
We're gonna be able to get her to cry a few times through this series. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure it's kind of they know how they can push and prod and what reactions they're going to be able to get and how that,
Yeah.
like from a block perspective, okay, we need some different personalities here, and we need probably a couple of couples that are probably going to rub up against each other not well, and these aren't going to get on and these will get on. And
Yeah.
I just find it quite fascinating. But
Absolutely.
with anything, I always find through a show, I always find the finale or the final last couple of episodes the best ones to watch.
Yeah.
Because the ones during it, I think, are a bit wishy-washy. But when you're getting to anything, it's even like sport. I don't really watch much rugby league through the season, but when it gets to the finals and when, everything is on the line, their season is on the line, sometimes careers are on the line, that's when I think you really see the performance and you see the potential, and people really deal with the pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of people that just join or just catch up on those reality shows in those last few episodes because they do so much recapping that, you really probably don't have to watch the whole thing. But
Yep.
it's really interesting when you're talking about the psychologists and the team of people behind, because I think you look at a show like Married at First Sight, they technically have, psychologists
I've
on
never
the
watched an
show.
episode. Never.
Okay, well, look, to be fair, your brain will be in far better condition than most in that case. But, they have these 3 experts that are apparently matching these couples together. But
Yep.
it's so obviously not. It's so clearly put together by production because they're making sure they're putting people who are polar opposites. You got a city girl and a country boy and an outspoken person with a really quiet, shy person, a really, sexually embracing kind of person with someone with no sexual experience. And, it's like you can just see what they're doing. And yeah, that makes for an interesting show. And it would be potentially quite boring if they actually matched people based on who's going to be the most cohesive and, calm couple.
Yep.
So, I think audiences are savvy enough now to see that there's so much of production in all of these shows. And we know now what happens to people when they go on reality TV. They all get a social media profile, and a lot of them are moving towards the influencer space or podcasting. I mean, how many more podcasts from reality stars do we need? But, here they keep coming. So you also question the authenticity of the majority of these people that go on the shows, because you think, well, are you here to find love? Because that's the show that we're watching. Or are you just writing this out for notoriety and fame and, being able to sell HelloFresh at the end of this on Instagram? So I think we're watching these shows differently now. Then certainly I did watch the first season and I was, loving it. It was more genuine and authentic then. But now we've got a new season next year and it's like, well, already all the drama's all over the Daily Mail. We're getting all kinds of insider info about what's happening, and it is all about the drama. So I think if we can watch these shows with the understanding that it's not what we thought it was going to be and it's not what they're actually selling us, but it is this like wild human behavior with the layers of, I suppose, what their objective is, which is to become someone, then maybe we can look at it through a different lens and it's a bit more palatable.
Yeah. And I think obviously there's some people that see reality TV as reality, but at the end of the day, you and I both know, Jana, and most people listening to this will kind of go, if I had someone following me around my life and my family life and everything like that, it's pretty boring really compared to reality TV.
Absolutely. Although there's plenty of drama at my house at 7:30 in the morning, trying to get everyone ready for school and out the door.
Or 6:30 at night.
Yes, exactly. I would not want cameras around for either of those ends of the day. But, so I do think, you got to actually be pretty brave to expose your life like that. And it isn't just necessarily a ticket into stardom, and it can come with a lot of criticism and a lot of negativity. But would you want cameras following you around, Steve?
No, not at all.
No.
At all. At the end of the day, I just think it'd be quite boring really compared to what people think reality TV is. But it's interesting. Reality TV is a really interesting thing. Tell me, what do you think we learn, as Australians, as human beings? What do you think we most learn from reality TV?
Well, I guess it depends what you're watching, and I am a self-confessed Bravo fan, right? So in my delusion, I feel like that's slightly more highbrow than things like MAFS or, some of the other
Farmer
offerings.
Wants a Wife.
Yeah. Although that's a little bit more, it feels like, I don't know, those country stars are a little bit more genuine. I don't know. There's just something, maybe it's my delusion about, the Aussie battler type. But the shows that I watch feel a little bit more removed from reality, potentially because of the production value. It's all pretty shiny and spectacular on those American shows. And they're so absolutely so far removed from my reality in the way that they're living, behaving, relating to each other. All of those things take me so far out of my reality that I don't know. I guess what I'm learning from it is how people show up in relationships, what the way that they speak to each other, the way that they're confronting things that, for example, if there's two reality, stars in a show, they break up, they've still got to keep filming together. In reality, we would have the option not to go to that event or to just like hide in the corner and not have to address that person if we didn't want to. But in these shows, they're encouraged to confront each other and be in the same space and say all of the things that they're thinking, because the camera's not inside their head. What we need to see is their thoughts on camera. So you're sort of getting to see people saying things that you would never dream of saying. Sometimes I'm on the edge of my seat because it's all of the things I wish I could say to someone that I have a similar relationship with. Or if there's a difficult friendship dynamic and seeing the way they navigate that and confront things and talk things out with each other. Again, absolutely no way would I react like that in my own life. But I feel like there's stuff we can all learn from it because they're bringing the narrative out of their head and into the open where we can all see it. So I think there is something to take away from reality TV. Even, the sloppy kind of messy drama shows, maybe what we're taking away from that is I would never behave like that. I would never speak to someone like that. I would never go on TV and behave like that. And all of that just gets you thinking and reflecting. It's like that mirror, that we were talking about before. It's thinking, how does this relate to my own life? And what would I do differently in my own relationships? And that could only be a good thing.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of people watching reality TV, they're kind of escaping, I suppose, because they want to see their relationship or they're attaching themselves to things that maybe they're lacking in their relationship or their life. And it's kind of, they're focusing on that, but if they could be, spending more time with their partner or spending more time kind of working on that stuff would be more beneficial than actually living in a bit of a dreamland.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we can all take things too far for sure. But I think that's why shows like The Bachelor were so wildly successful because everybody wants to be loved. And they were kind of selling the dream that you could go on this show and have this kind of fairy tale ending and these dreamlike dates. And, for a time, that was like the number one show everywhere in the world. And it was early reality TV when there weren't that many options in that kind of realm. And I think it sold a dream. And for many people, that was kind of like, oh, well, maybe I'll, find my bachelor or bachelorette in the same way. Whereas now we know it's been cancelled here in Australia. And I wonder if it's because people have wisened up a little bit and see through all the production input and the, manufactured drama and the sell that they're trying to do. Or if people have moved on and are stars in their own lives now, so they don't really need to look to the TV for other, stars and ways to kind of zhuzh up their own life because they can do it themselves.
And, obviously very early on, Big Brother was a big one that kind of hit the screens and it was very popular in, Sarah Marie and, some of these really great personalities. But over time, Big Brother kind of, back to what I was kind of saying, it was videoing their everyday life, which was actually quite boring. Oh, someone coming in and combing their hair and, and it would actually have to be Big Brother that would actually have to cause the drama and have to cause the unreality, which then became reality, which was the exciting parts of it. But the lives were really like, okay, they're making breakfast. Great. How much? Oh, he puts a little bit too much Vegemite on his toast in the morning or whatever it is, right? But it was quite boring. And I actually think that's why Big Brother's kind of very much died it was very popular and they tried to bring it back a number of times, but I just think it's lost the relevance.
Well, it's coming back again next year, Steve.
Is it?
They're trying again on a new channel. And I don't know. I think they've had to mix it up a few times, maybe to try and keep up with the fast pace of other reality shows. But, it's funny. I loved early Big Brother, where it was just watching them sitting around and forming relationships and, all of that stuff. I loved it. Big Brother Up Late, hosted by Mike Goldman, who I've had on my show. I love him. And he was narrating, from almost like a beanbag, just like commenting on what was going on. And then we'd go live back to the house because there was some action happening somewhere. And I loved that. But when they started introducing all of that competition and that almost like Survivor level, the Friday night games and whatever, I actually couldn't stand those episodes. I found that really annoying. And of course I continued to watch, Steve, and I did watch all the other iterations. And my gorgeous friend Heidi Anderson is one of the early Big Brother cast-offs, and we talk about this quite a bit. But I loved it, and I really have hope that when they bring it back next year, that it's going to be a little bit more like the original format, where it is a little bit more authentic and less, interruption from Big Brother and production. But that will remain to be seen.
Yeah, and it's kind of that difference between the excitement of they've got to keep people engaged and exciting and keep it exciting all the time. But as we know through podcasts and a lot of things that you can listen to and watch now and people's real lives, is that people are loving to listen to almost the mundane, boring parts of people's lives because they can relate to them, right? So, like people check out stories now and people love hearing about, a mum that's like, oh my God, I've had the morning from hell,
Yeah.
right? And, I woke up, my, daughter had chewing gum in her hair and I had to cut it out or what, like all these
Yeah.
different things because people go, oh, I'm
I'm
normal.
seen. Yeah.
We're all normal,
Yeah.
and I think, you mentioned earlier about, sharing that, you struggle with anxiety. And like, I just love that because we need more of that. For years, I've shared a lot of stuff and probably some people go and feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I go, if you share the weight off your shoulders, actually, like you just feel so much lighter because you feel like you can be yourself. You feel like that you can share who you are. And also, that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Whatever you feel, someone else feels, a lot of people feel. And it's that knowing of we're all very interesting, unique, very complicated human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's at the core of reality TV, right? Those early shows where we were just following families around or whatever it was. It was all about relating and you talk about the boring bits, but I feel like those boring bits are what people connect to. Like you said, it's the mundane. Oh, they're struggling to get their kids to school too. And they're having that argument with their partner about talking to an ex on text. And what is okay in that situation? Would I text my ex and would he be okay with it? Yeah, he'd be fine with it, but that ex wouldn't have been. Or, it's like starting conversations. And I think that's what's good about it. And all of this at the core of it, the podcasting, the talking, the reality TV, all of it is storytelling. And as you said, that is like the number one thing that keeps us connected as humans and helps us to feel like we're okay. And no matter what I said today, I could say the most outrageous thing in the world that maybe I would feel like nobody else could possibly understand because this is my reality. And there will always be people listening who will go, oh, wow, that's like me. Wow. I've never heard someone say that before. Or, oh, thank God it's another person talking about this because today I was just feeling like, what is wrong with me? And maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe it's okay to be feeling like this. And so that's why, like you, I feel like it's so important to keep talking about things and to keep sharing our stories and our experiences because that's what makes us human and that's what helps us all to feel okay.
Yeah, it definitely helps others. I wanted to ask you if there was a reality TV show that you could launch yourself, what would you like to see?
Oh, very good question. Very, very good question. I mean, I think when I think about the shows that I've loved over the years, and this might not mean a lot to people listening, but if you are in this world with me, shows like Vanderpump Rules in the early days. There's a show at the moment called Southern Hospitality, which is a spin-off of Southern Charm. Original Real Housewives of New York, or Orange County. The thing that made those shows the huge global successes that they were was that at the heart of it, it was real friends, a real group of friends with complicated dynamics and relationships and all of the things that come with being friends for a long time. And watching them navigate life together and have genuine issues with each other, support for each other, love for each other. We were invested in them because they had real relationships and love for each other. I feel like where shows don't go so well is where it's all manufactured and they're just putting people together in a room through casting. As you say, we need this kind of personality and that will work well against this one. And it's too calculated and it's too manufactured and they fizzle out. So I think any kind of show that I would like to see would need to come with real and genuine, long-standing connections, a real group of friends that we infiltrate and get to know and see fall apart and come back together because we care.
And I actually think, if we look at something like Big Brother and then, Mike used to do the Up Late,
Yeah.
I actually think that, and podcasts have come a long way now and there's a lot of, live streams and everything, but I actually think that an Up Late that would really get people listening and engaged now would be, okay, let's watch an episode of Big Brother and then let's talk about it. A bit like what you and Heidi do, right?
Yeah.
You kind of pull things apart and kind of go, okay, cool. What do we take from this episode? What could we learn about ourselves? What could we learn about our partners, our relationships, how we communicate, how we don't communicate, our reactions? How
Yep.
can we be better by looking at this reality TV?
Yeah.
And I think that's where whatever comes out into the future, I think that's where they need to go with it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're all, armchair psychologists. We all know enough about mental health and human behavior that we can have really interesting conversations about these things. So I agree. It's all about, and you touched on, Heidi Anderson, who I mentioned before. We do a live series called Pop Therapy as a therapist and who loves reality TV and a former reality star who loves human behavior. And that intersection between our interests and experience and this armchair psychology on what we're watching on these shows. And, again, it's the storytelling and the relating as a human being with a full spectrum of feelings and emotions and personal experiences and behaviors in our own lives to unpack. And I love it.
And it also shows you as well, is that there's no right or wrong opinion on anything. It's just your opinion.
Yeah.
Right. So what your opinion is, what Heidi's opinion is in a chat, and you kind of, like you'll get other people that'll jump into comments and stuff and say, oh, I think this and I think that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And there's actually power in all those different opinions because it's just an opportunity for people to learn.
Exactly. And again, it's all just about connection. And we're all connecting to what we're watching and how we're feeling and how it makes us react. And I love that Heidi and I so often have completely different perspectives on things. And it makes for a really healthy debate. And, that's kind of what life is, right? We're always going to encounter people with a different opinion or, response to something. And we need to be able to have healthy discussion around it. So,
well, it's boring otherwise. If you jumped on a live, like a live chat with Heidi and you were like, oh, I think this, Heidi. And Heidi goes, yeah, I think the same.
Yeah.
And what do you think about this, Jana? And Jana goes, yeah, I think the same. Well, that's pretty boring, isn't it? Because the more questions and the more discussion and the more kind of debate that happens, it actually gets people listening, debating themselves and kind of pulling things apart rather than just kind of taking things for what they are.
Yeah, exactly. And what a great metaphor for life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, Jana, over the years of being a therapist, having all the roles that you've had, talk to me about what are some of the non-negotiables that you put into life to kind of bring yourself back to ground, to keep your wellness and well-being in check, and you obviously mentally, your mental health, I suppose, working on your mental health to make sure that that's kind of, looked after as well.
Well, unfortunately, having 3 kids means my non-negotiables definitely become negotiable. I wish I could say I invested as much time in my self-care as I should, but unfortunately I don't, which is why I'm working on all of these other things at the moment to try and get that nervous system reset happening. And I am probably in the last few months I've been much better at that, but it is for me things like I do need time alone to recharge. And in a busy house and with a million jobs, that's very precious real estate that you can almost never get to. Things like time with friends, connection for me, being able to go out with the girls for dinner or for a walk or, something like that. A catch up with a friend is so nourishing for me, where I can just be me and I don't have people hanging off my body. I'm not worrying about, the things I need to do. I'm just in that moment for that period of time, and that's really important. And, equally the debrief that I have with my colleagues is vital to surviving the work that I do. So, we do kind of have informal supervision with each other all the time, talking through cases or concerns and that sort of thing, and trying to leave that then at the door so that I'm not at home still ruminating over something that happened in a session or with a client that I just need to follow up and I've still got to do X, Y, and Z, or even with the podcast and books and stuff like that, trying to get as much of that wrapped up as I can before I'm in family mode, because that's when I find I have the least patience and I'm the worst version of myself, is when my brain is still in 15 different places. And of course, I can't switch that off completely. And I'm nowhere near perfect, but that's my goal for 2025, is to just be more present in the space with my family and letting go of those threads of all the other obligations and responsibilities, which I love, and I love doing them, but just trying to have a better boundary between them so that I'm the best version I can be for my kids.
Yep. And I think that's a reflection that probably everyone would have. Like, everyone's listening to this going, especially mums, right, would be listening to this going, I'm with your sister.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard. It's so hard to be all the things and be everything to everyone. And I don't know if it's just boys. I have 3 boys, but it's honestly like they're trying to reabsorb back into my body wherever I am, So my partner is just like a free body walking around the house. No matter where I am, they are like on me or near me and mom, 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 mom. And I'm just like, where's that? I need that like cave to go into just for like reset and come back out again.
Yeah. You can't escape it.
Nah, you just can't. You can't.
Yeah. Jana, can I ask you, through your life, how have you viewed success and what does success mean to you today?
I think, earlier, and I'm nearly 43 now. So I probably think in my 20s and 30s, success was measurable by achievement. I've done this, I've achieved this, I've ticked something off. But I think now what success is to me is the feeling that I get when I've done something that's made me feel great. So, having a really, interesting conversation in a podcast, for example, I'm not going, quick, add that to my CV that I've been on the Share podcast and, did these things, but I'll feel great after having had that conversation. That feels like success for me. It's when I'm in alignment doing something that lights me up and makes me feel passionate. So I think for me, that's now my measure of success.
Yeah, awesome. And throughout your life, who would you say has been your greatest teacher?
Look, is it really cliched if I say there's probably 2 parts? I would say the death of my mother for the last 20 years has been a huge teacher. That whole experience has informed every part of my life. But also now, as a parent, it has to be my kids. I see myself completely differently when I'm with them. I see when I'm triggered and activated and out of control and mirroring their, whatever it is that's going on. And that is so hard. I can work with clients on all of their reactions and responses and see it so clearly, but being able to control my own responses and reactions with my kids at times when you're overwhelmed, overstimulated, all of those things is so hard. And
Mm.
I feel like that is going to be the challenge for me probably in the next few years as we're approaching adolescence with my eldest, and how to manage myself as an individual, as a parent, and hopefully as an evolving person who's continuing to work on themselves.
Yeah, perfect. Now, the next question I was going to ask you was, and the last question was, obviously, we're always learning and growing, and you've touched on it a little bit, but what would you say would be the number one thing that you haven't fully yet learned about yourself?
Um, a lot of things, really. I think it's important to continue questioning ourselves until we die, and anytime you think you've got something and you've nailed it and you've worked it out, another layer will reveal itself. And I think that's magic. And it shouldn't feel overwhelming. It shouldn't feel scary. We've got this kind of arrival fallacy in the back of our minds often with we just need to get there and then everything's going to be okay. I just need to understand this about myself and then I'm going to be okay. But
Yep.
but there doesn't exist, It's just the next place and the next chapter. And I think coming to terms with that is really important.
Mm.
And, for me personally, I would like to know why I have this urge to just be doing, 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 doing. I'm addicted to the busyness and I'm trying really hard not to be. Because at the same time, it's what exhausts me and is the thing that, is the most difficult part of my life is the busyness. But I love
Yep.
the busyness. So
So what do you think the busyness is masking?
if I knew that, Steve, I'd be all right, wouldn't I? So maybe that's what I'm working on. Why do I need to fill up all the spaces? But I'm really proud of myself because this week, I've been on leave from end of year leave from one of my jobs and one of my therapy jobs, and instead of filling it, my kids have still been at school this week, so I'm like, okay, I've got 1 week to do all the things and do all the things. But actually, you know what I've been doing? I've been running, I've been watching my shows, I've been doing a little bit of emailing and working, but actually giving myself permission to not be doing.
Yep.
And I think that's a challenge for me ongoing.
Yeah. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people, but especially for, busy, high performing mums, right? Because they trying to do absolutely everything. And I think mums have to wear more hats than probably us guys do, right? Completely, right? It's the mum, it's the wife, it's the lover, it's the colleague, it's the friend, it's the all these different
Yeah.
things, and it's not a work life balance, it's not a work friend balance, it's a juggle, right? It's a
Yeah.
constant juggle. And I look at the wheel of life when I get people through a coaching, I do a wheel of life and I'll go, okay, out of 10, what are you in finance, in relationships and stuff? And no one's got a wheel that's, if put on a car, would just travel nicely down the road, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're focusing at the moment on your fitness, well, something else has got to give, right?
Yeah.
If your relationship's in a really good place, well, your health might not be as good.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
it's
So
always
true.
like a moving, it's a moving wheel, and it's all out of proportion most of the time. You're just trying to get it to look somewhat like something that can get you down that road.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's part of the challenge for all of us, isn't it? Just
Yeah.
being okay with things not being okay and being okay with feeling out of control and figuring out where you might need to realign some things or put energy in a different basket in order to, preserve that sanity or that uh, all of the mental load that comes along with all of the things you mentioned before. So, yeah, I think again, the key word that keeps coming up for me in this podcast is that personal reflection. And as long as we all keep doing that, then, we can only be moving forward.
Yeah. And it puts us in a better position to actually help others as well, because the more we reflect, the more questions we kind of can ask of others, and
Yeah.
we can help other people get through their kind of chapters as well. And one of the key things is, through this podcast is really, when we share, we don't just help ourselves, we help each other.
Yeah.
And it's just a really powerful element of just continuing to grow, but also know that, you mentioned there, it's okay that we're not okay, right? Like that's right, because accepting that we're all not okay. And that's why I
Yeah.
think from a reality TV, a social media is, I'm a really big advocate for, if you want to show the glitz and glamour, great. But I also want to see when you're in the trenches and you're just like having your lows and you're
Yeah.
sharing that, because people go, oh, they're not just the glitz and glamour. I
Yeah.
look at someone like Yelena Dokic who shows both sides, right? And I love it,
Yeah.
right? Like I've messaged her a number of times and just said, I just love when people show that,
Yeah.
those both sides, the duality of life,
Absolutely.
because then people go, it's just authenticity, and
Yeah.
authenticity in life is like gold.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So all good. Now, Jana, for those that want to reach out to you, that want to connect, I know you've got a couple of books, connect with your podcast. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Probably best to find me on Instagram, which is at Jana.Firestone, and it's Jana with a J, confusingly. So Jana.Firestone, and feel free, my DMs are always open, so feel free to send me a message. There are lots of ways we can work together. Or if you just want to connect and get on the reality train with me, Heidi and I do our live series usually on a Thursday. We're just going to take a little break over Christmas, New Year. But we would love to welcome some more reality TV connoisseurs into our little world. So come and chat.
Awesome. Well, this episode will launch in 2025, so it'll be early 2025. But I've tuned into some of the stuff, and it's entertaining, and I just love what you're doing, some of the people that you're connecting with, and just sharing those stories, sharing the reflections, the insights. And I just love on this podcast and on this platform just chatting to really interesting people, but people that are all kind of shining a bit of a light in the world and kind of giving people some more hope and some more, I suppose, perspective, so that they can kind of, be better versions of themselves. So congratulations on what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I wish you a great year ahead, and I look forward to connecting further as well.
Thank you so much, Steve. This has been beautiful. Thanks so much for having me.
No, it's been an enjoyable discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.